The Forbidden Game. It was a quiet Saturday evening in Fairview, the kind of town where everyone knew each other. Fairview wasn't big, but it was home, with its leafy streets and old houses. I was at Jake's house for a sleepover with our usual crew. Sarah, Emily, and me, Mark. We were just hanging out in the basement, which was this cozy place filled with old furniture and a bunch of board games we never played anymore. It felt safe down there, like nothing bad could ever happen. We were just goofing around, telling jokes and watching some dumb movie we had seen 100 times. It was a typical night, but I guess that's when things usually go wrong, right? When you least expect it. You see, I've been carrying around this fear since I was 13. That's when my younger brother, Tom, disappeared. One day he was there, and the next he was gone. Just vanished without a trace. It left this huge hole in my life, and I could never really get over it. I still have nightmares about him, about what might have happened. Hey Mark, you still with us? Jake nudged me with his elbow, snapping me out of my thoughts. He was always the one with the crazy ideas, the one who never took anything seriously. I forced a smile. Yeah, sorry. Just spaced out, I said, trying to shake off the dark memories. Let's do something fun. How about we play a game? Jake suggested, his eyes twinkling with mischief. He pulled out this old yellowed piece of paper and 2 pencils. Ever heard of the Charlie pencil game? I laughed it off at first, thinking he was joking, but he was serious. Sarah rolled her eyes, and Emily looked intrigued but nervous. Seriously, Jake, isn't that just some dumb internet thing? I asked, but deep down, I felt a shiver. I wasn't superstitious, but something about that game felt off. Come on, it'll be fun. What are you scared? Jake teased, and I could see the challenge in his eyes. He always knew how to push my buttons. All right, let's do it, I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. We set up the paper with the yes and no quadrants and balanced the pencils on top of each other. The air in the room seemed to change, growing heavier. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach, but I ignored it. Charlie, are you there? Jake called out, his voice full of mock seriousness. We all waited, holding our breaths. Nothing happened at first, and we started to laugh. But then, slowly, the top pencil began to move. It shifted towards yes, and the laughter died in our throats. Sarah looked around nervously. Jake, this isn't funny anymore. Let's stop. Jake just grinned. Come on, it's just a game. But something inside me was screaming that it wasn't. The room felt colder after the pencil moved. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something I was unable to see, but could definitely sense. We laughed it off, trying to ignore the unease that had settled over us like a thick fog. Jake was still grinning, but even he seemed a bit uneasy now. Okay, maybe that was just a fluke, Jake said, his voice not quite as confident as before. Let's ask another question. Charlie, will we be friends forever? Emily asked hesitantly. Her voice trembled slightly, and I noticed her glancing nervously at the door, as if ready to bolt. The pencil stayed still this time, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Just as I was about to suggest we stop, the top pencil jerked suddenly, pointing to no. A chill ran down my spine, and I could see Sarah's face turn pale. Okay, this is getting creepy, Sarah said, rubbing her arms as if trying to warm herself. Let's just put it away. Jake nodded, but I could see the gears turning in his head. He was the type who wouldn't let something like this go easily. We packed up the pencils and tried to move on, but the atmosphere in the basement had changed. The shadows seemed darker, and the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. As the night went on, strange things started happening. The lights flickered occasionally, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. I thought I heard faint whispers, just on the edge of hearing, but when I asked if anyone else heard them, they all shook their heads. Maybe I was just imagining things. I think we should all stick together tonight, Emily said quietly. Just in case. We all agreed, and we made a makeshift bed on the basement floor, using old blankets and pillows. As we settled down, the unease didn't go away. I kept looking over at the corner where we had played the game, half expecting to see something lurking there. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a soft scratching noise, like something was moving across the floor. My heart pounded as I sat up, straining to see in the dim light. The scratching continued, coming from the direction of the stairs. I nudged Jake awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. Jake listened for a moment, then nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "What is that?" he asked, his voice barely audible. We both got up slowly, trying not to wake the girls. We crept towards the stairs, the scratching growing louder with each step. My palms were sweaty, and I could feel my heart beating in my throat. We reached the bottom of the stairs and saw it. The old piece of paper with the game layout on it, moving as if something invisible was trying to write on it. "Jake, what the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I don't know, man. Maybe we should have listened to those warnings," Jake replied, fear evident in his voice. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang, and we both jumped. The sound echoed in the dark, and the air grew colder. The paper stopped moving, but the sense of dread remained. We backed away from the stairs, returning to the makeshift bed, trying to act like everything was normal. But I knew, deep down, that things were far from normal. As we lay back down, I whispered to Jake, "We need to figure out what's going on. This can't be a coincidence." Jake nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. We didn't know it yet, but that night was only the beginning. The real horror was yet to come, and I could feel it creeping closer, like a shadow in the dark. The next day, we all tried to act like everything was normal, but the tension was palpable. None of us had slept well, and the events of the previous night hung over us like a dark cloud. I could see the fear in my friends' eyes, though they tried to hide it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized we had opened a door we couldn't close. Sarah was the first to break the silence as we sat around the breakfast table, picking at our food. "We need to talk about what happened last night," she said, her voice trembling. "Something's not right." "Maybe it was just our imaginations," Jake suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "We were tired, and the basement is creepy at night." "It wasn't our imaginations," Emily snapped, her usual calm demeanor cracking. "I saw the paper move. You all heard the door slam. Something's happening, and we can't just ignore it." I couldn't shake the feeling that my brother's disappearance was somehow connected to this. It seemed crazy, but the fear I felt now was the same as the fear I felt when he vanished. "Maybe we need to stop playing games and figure out what we're dealing with," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake looked at me, his face a mask of frustration. "So, what do you suggest, Mark? Call a priest? Hunt for ghosts? This isn't some horror movie." "No, but something real is happening," I insisted, "and pretending it isn't won't make it go away." As we argued, I noticed that Emily had gone pale, her eyes wide with fear. She was staring at the wall behind me. "Guys, look," she whispered. We turned to see faint scratches on the wall, like something had clawed its way across the surface. The room went silent, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah stood up, her face set with determination. "We need to find out more about this game. There has to be a reason why it's affecting us like this." "Agreed," I said, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Maybe we can find something online or in old books. Anything that can help us understand what's happening." Jake sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, we'll look into it. But I still think we're overreacting." As the day wore on, we started our research. Sarah and Emily combed through the internet, finding bits and pieces about the Charlie game. Most of it was urban legend stuff, but some of it hinted at darker origins. I kept thinking about my brother, The way he used to play in that same basement before he disappeared. Was it possible he had encountered this too? "Look at this," Sarah said, pointing to an old forum post. "It says here that the game might have roots in ancient rituals, used to summon spirits or demons." Emily shuddered. "That would explain the cold, the scratches, everything." "Great. So we're dealing with some ancient curse," Jake muttered. "Just what we needed." Despite his sarcasm, I could see the fear in his eyes. We were all scared, but we needed to stay strong to face this together. As night fell, the unease returned, and we all decided to stay at Jake's house again. Safety in numbers, we told ourselves. That night, as we huddled together in the basement, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. My mind kept drifting to my brother, to the possibility that he had faced the same horror we were now encountering. "Mark," Emily whispered as we lay there, "do you think your brother's disappearance is connected to this?" I took a deep breath, considering the possibility. "I don't know, but it feels like it. Like there's something here that wants to hurt us." Jake sighed. "Well, if it is, we're not going down without a fight. We're in this together." I appreciated Jake's bravado, but deep down, I knew we were facing something beyond our understanding. The scratches on the wall, the whispers in the dark, they were all signs of a looming danger. And as I closed my eyes, trying to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were only scratching the surface of a much deeper, darker secret. Our bonds were being tested, and I could only hope they were strong enough to withstand what was coming. That night, the atmosphere in the basement was thick with dread. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. We had found enough about the game to know that it was more than just a prank. There was something real and sinister at play, something that had taken an interest in us. We decided to play the game one last time, hoping to find some answers or a way to end whatever curse we had awakened. The air was cold, and I could see my breath in front of me as we set up the pencils. Sarah, Jake, Emily, and I sat in a circle, our faces illuminated by the dim glow of a single flashlight. Charlie, are you here?" Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the top pencil moved to yes. The temperature seemed to drop even further, and I could feel a presence in the room, something dark and malevolent. "Charlie, what do you want from us?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. The pencils moved again, this time spelling out pay. "What do we have to pay?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with fear. The pencils spelled out blood. A cold chill ran down my spine. "This has to stop," I said, my voice firm. "We need to end this now." "But how?" Jake asked, looking desperate. "We don't even know what we're dealing with." "I think I know," I said, my mind racing. "It's connected to my brother. I can feel it. Maybe if we destroy the game, we can break the connection." We gathered the paper and pencils, and I set them in the middle of our circle. As I lit a match, ready to burn the items, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The flashlight flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. In the pitch black, I could hear a soft whispering, growing louder and more insistent. It was like a chorus of voices, all speaking at once, and I could feel their malevolent intent. I fumbled for the match, my hands shaking, and struck it against the box. The tiny flame illuminated the fear on my friends' faces, and I quickly set the paper on fire. The flames roared to life, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The whispers grew into screams, and the room seemed to shake. Then, suddenly, everything went silent. The fire burned out quickly, leaving nothing but ashes. We sat there, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. "It's over," Emily said, her voice filled with relief. But as we started to relax, I noticed something strange. The ashes on the floor began to move, swirling together to form a single word. "Now." A cold dread filled my chest. "It's not over," I whispered. "We've only made it angry." Before we could react, a dark figure emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was Charlie, or whatever malevolent spirit had taken on that name. It reached out, and I felt a cold hand close around my wrist. "You should not have played the game," it whispered, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "Now you are mine." In a desperate move, I grabbed the flashlight and swung it at the figure. The light passed right through it, but it seemed to recoil, as if hurt by the light. I kept swinging, trying to keep it at bay. "Run," I shouted to my friends. "Get out of here." They hesitated, but then they turned and ran up the stairs. I could feel the spirit's grip tightening, pulling me closer. But I wasn't going to go down without a fight. With a final effort, I smashed the flashlight into the ground, shattering it and plunging the room into darkness once more. The spirit's grip loosened, and I could feel it fading away. But before it disappeared completely, it whispered one last thing in my ear. "This is just the beginning." In the aftermath, we all tried to return to our normal lives, but things were never the same. The experience had changed us, bound us together in ways we couldn't explain. We made a pact never to speak of what happened, hoping that would keep the darkness at bay. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to notice strange things happening again. Shadows that moved on their own, whispers in the dark. And then, one day, I found a piece of paper in my room, with the words Charlie, Charlie written on a T. I realized then that we hadn't escaped. We had only traded one curse for another. And now, it was my turn to play the game again, alone. The Haunting of Roosevelt High. You know, Chicago is a city full of secrets. It's got its glitz and glamour, sure, but it's the old forgotten places that tell the real stories. I'm Jake, just a regular guy who finds peace in exploring these abandoned spots, taking pictures of crumbling buildings, dusty corridors, and the eerie quiet. It's like capturing a piece of history before it fades away. I used to go to an old high school on the west side, Roosevelt High. It's been closed for years now, but it still stands there, a ghost of its former self. I guess I've always felt a pull towards it, like a magnet. But there's a reason for that, something I don't talk about much. You see, when I was a senior, my best friend Max and me, we were inseparable. We did everything together. One night, we sneaked into the school just for fun. Kids, right? But something went wrong. Max went down into the basement, and he never came back. They said it was an accident. But deep down, I knew something was off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, that the school held some dark secret. I've always feared dark, tight spaces since that night. It's like the darkness is alive, waiting to swallow me whole. But last week, I heard about this group of teenagers playing the Charlie Charlie game in one of the old classrooms. They claimed they summoned a spirit. I had to see it for myself. Closure, you know? So, I grabbed my camera and headed to Roosevelt High. The place was just as creepy as I remembered. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, and an unsettling silence. As I walked through the halls, memories came flooding back. I could almost hear the echo of laughter, the sound of lockers slamming. It was like the building was alive with the ghosts of the past. When I got to the chemistry lab, the room where the kids had played the game, I started setting up my gear. That's when I met him, the janitor. He was old, with gray hair and a face full of wrinkles. His eyes were sharp, though, like he knew more than he let on. "Shouldn't be here after dark," he said, leaning on his mop. "Bad things happen in this place when the sun goes down." "I'm just here to take some pictures," I replied, trying to sound casual. "I won't be long." "Suit yourself," he muttered, shaking his head. "But don't say I didn't warn you." As he walked away, I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off. I was here for a reason, and I wasn't leaving until I found what I was looking for. You believe in ghosts, old man? I called after him. He paused, just for a second. Belief's got nothing to do with it. They're here, whether you believe or not. And with that, he disappeared down the hall, leaving me alone in the darkening room. I set up my camera, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows seemed to come alive, dancing on the walls. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. This was just an old building, I told myself. There was nothing to be afraid of. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, something that didn't want me there. And that's when I realized I wasn't alone. As the last rays of sunlight vanished, the school took on an entirely different aura. The air grew colder and a damp, musty smell filled the halls. My camera was set, its red recording light blinking steadily. I started snapping pictures, each flash illuminating the decaying room for a brief moment before plunging it back into darkness. It was then that I began to notice the small things. A draft that seemed to come from nowhere, rustling the papers on the old desks. The faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hall, even though I was sure I was alone. And then there were the whispers, soft, indistinct, like a distant conversation that stopped whenever I tried to listen closely. I shook my head, trying to clear it. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered to myself. "It's just an old building, nothing to be scared of." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. My eyes were drawn to the blackboard, where someone had scrawled, "Charlie, Charlie, can we play?" in white chalk. The handwriting looked recent, too recent. I walked over, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls, and ran my fingers over the chalk marks. They were fresh. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the halls. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room and the creaking of the old building settling. Or was it? My instincts screamed at me to leave, but curiosity and a need for answers kept me rooted to the spot. I decided to take a break, hoping to calm my nerves. I pulled out my phone to check the time. Midnight. Great. Just the right time for creepy things to happen, I thought wryly. I glanced through the photos I'd taken, hoping to distract myself. Most were just what I expected. Dusty desks, broken chairs, graffiti-covered walls. But one photo made me pause. There, in the corner of the frame, was a faint shadow. It looked like a person, but distorted, twisted. Must be a trick of the light, I whispered, though my voice sounded hollow in the empty room. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Very wrong. I decided to check out the basement. Maybe if I faced my fear, I could put this all to rest. I made my way through the dark halls, each step echoing loudly. The basement door was just as I remembered it. Heavy, metal, and covered in rust. It creaked loudly as I pushed it open, the sound reverberating through the empty corridors. The basement was pitch black, and the air was thick with the smell of mold and decay. I shone my flashlight around, the beam cutting through the darkness. The stairs creaked under my weight, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance. As I reached the bottom, a cold breeze brushed past me, sending shivers down my spine. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I was plunged into darkness. When the light came back on, I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the floor, arranged in a perfect circle, were the remnants of the Charlie Charlie game. 2 pencils, balanced in a cross, and a sheet of paper with I as a no written on it. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The pencils started to move, slowly, almost imperceptibly. I felt a chill in the air, like an icy hand brushing against my skin. "Charlie, Charlie, are you here?" I whispered, more to myself than anything. The pencils jerked, the top one spinning slowly until it pointed to I's. I staggered back, almost dropping my flashlight. This wasn't possible. It had to be a trick, a prank. But as I stood there, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, and I knew, deep down, that this was no joke. I wasn't alone. Something was here with me, something that didn't want me to leave. And I had a sinking feeling that things were about to get much worse. The basement felt colder, more oppressive. As the minutes ticked by, my breath came in short, ragged gasps, and I had to remind myself to keep calm. I needed to get to the bottom of this, but the weight of my fear was crushing. My thoughts kept drifting back to Max and that awful night. What if the same thing that took him was coming for me? Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me back to the present. It was a text from Sarah, my girlfriend. She was worried, asking why I hadn't answered her calls. "Jake, where are you? Are you okay?" she had typed. I hesitated for a moment, then replied quickly, "I'm at Roosevelt High, just taking some pictures. I'll be fine, promise." Her reply was instant. "Come home, Jake. It's not worth it. Please, just come home." I could almost hear the worry in her voice. Sarah had always been my rock, the one who kept me grounded. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. "I need to do this, Sarah. For Max. I'll be home soon, okay?" I typed back. "Jake, please," she responded. But I tucked my phone back into my pocket, pushing her concerns to the back of my mind. I had to see this through. The whispers grew louder, and I felt a presence behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and silence. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I tried to focus on the task at hand. I pulled out a small notebook and began jotting down my observations, hoping the act of writing would calm my nerves. But my hands were shaking too much to write legibly. "You always did this, Jake," I muttered to myself. Always had to be the hero. Always had to find the answers. A sound echoed through the basement, like footsteps on wet concrete, and I froze, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time. My flashlight flickered, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. Just the steady drip of water and the echo of my own voice. I thought of Max again, of how he used to laugh at my fear of the dark. "It's just shadows, Jake," he'd say. Nothing to be scared of. But I was scared. I was terrified. And I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike. I moved deeper into the basement, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls. The air grew colder, and the whispers became more distinct. It sounded like a voice, speaking a language I couldn't understand. "Jake, you need to leave," I whispered to myself. "This place isn't safe." But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not without answers. Suddenly, my flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled with it, trying to make it work, but it was dead. Panic set in, and I could feel my heart racing. "Okay, calm down," I told myself. "Just stay calm." I reached for my phone, using its screen to cast a dim light around me. The shadows seemed to move, to shift and writhe in the faint glow. And then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the light, watching me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, a dark silhouette against the wall. And then it began to approach, slowly, deliberately. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. "Stay back," I shouted, but the figure kept coming. And then I heard a voice, soft and chilling. "You shouldn't have come here, Jake." I recognized that voice. It was Max. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it. This wasn't possible. Max was dead. He had been dead for years. But the figure stepped into the light, and I saw his face. It was Max, But not Max. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale and lifeless. "Max?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "Is it really you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he raised a hand and pointed behind me. I turned, slowly, and saw something that made my blood run cold. The Charlie game was set up again. But this time, the pencils were moving on their own, spelling out a message. "Leave." I turned back to Max, but he was gone. The basement was empty, the shadows still and silent. My phone buzzed again, and I saw another message from Sarah. "Jake, please come home. I'm scared for you." I knew she was right. I had to leave. But as I made my way back up the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, something that didn't want me to escape. As I stumbled up the stairs, each step felt like it took an eternity. The air was thick, with the smell of mold and decay, and every creak of the old building sent shivers down my spine. My heart pounded, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. I reached the top of the stairs and burst into the hallway, gasping for breath. The whispers had stopped, but the silence was even more unnerving. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears, and I forced myself to calm down, to think. "Just get out, Jake," I muttered to myself. "Get out and never come back." I started down the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The exit was just ahead. I could see the faint light of the street lamps outside, and I quickened my pace. But then the air grew colder and the shadows seemed to lengthen, creeping along the walls like dark fingers. "Jake." I froze. The voice was soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It was Max. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing at the end of the hallway. His eyes were hollow, and his skin was pale. But it was him. "Max," I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there staring at me. I took a step back, and he mirrored my movement, taking a step forward. Panic set in, and I turned to run, but the door at the end of the hall slammed shut with a deafening bang. "Jake, why did you come back?" Max's voice echoed in the darkness. "I had to know the truth," I said, my voice barely audible. "I had to know what happened to you." He took another step forward, his eyes filled with sorrow. "You shouldn't have come back. You shouldn't have played the game." I shook my head, trying to make sense of it all. "What do you mean? What game?" "The Charlie game," he said, his voice hollow. "It wasn't just a game, Jake. It was a summoning. And now, it's too late." My mind raced, trying to process what he was saying. "Too late for what?" "To escape," he whispered. "The spirit, it needs a host. It needed me, and now it needs you." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The game, the whispers, the cold. It was all connected. And now, I was trapped. "No, this can't be happening," I said, backing away. "This isn't real." "It's real, Jake," Max said, his voice filled with sorrow. "And you need to get out before it's too late." I turned and ran, but the hallway seemed to stretch on forever. The whispers grew louder, and I could feel the cold seeping into my bones. I reached the door and yanked it open, bursting into the night air. I ran down the steps, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold followed me, clinging to my skin like a second shadow. I didn't stop until I reached the street, collapsing on the sidewalk. My phone buzzed again, and I saw a message from Sarah. "Jake, where are you? Are you okay?" I typed back, my hands shaking. "I'm okay. I'm coming home." I stood up, taking one last look at the old school. The shadows seemed to shift, and for a moment I thought I saw Max standing in the doorway. But then he was gone, and the school's just an empty, decaying building once more. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me, watching me. And deep down, I knew that the game wasn't over. Not yet. Months passed, and I tried to put that night behind me. I moved on, focusing on my photography and my life with Sarah. But the nightmares never stopped. Every night I dreamed of the school, of Max, of the whispers. One evening I was developing some old photos I'd taken at Roosevelt High. As the images came into focus, my heart skipped a beat. There, in the corner of every frame, was the shadowy figure of Max, watching me. I felt a chill run down my spine, and the whispers began again, soft and insistent. Jake. Jake. I turned around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty room and the cold, creeping darkness. I realized then that I hadn't escaped. The spirit hadn't let me go. It had followed me, waiting, watching, and I knew, with a sinking feeling of dread, that I was never really free. The game would never end, and the spirit would never stop until it had what it wanted. Charlie, can we play? I whispered, and the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness.